And so I go, okay, well, Moroni, why did you put my whole family through, I can see Joseph, why did you put myself and my whole family through this when you could have just held on to them the whole time and I could just do it in this different way? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to say you don't need to use the plates for translation.
Our church historians at BYU and elsewhere rewrote the early narrative of the church to try to match the March Kaufman forgeries because they thought they were legit. And now they had to come up with this whole narrative about how, well, this is normal. Folk magic was normal. They were all involved in folk magic. It was all okay, even though it wasn't part of the narrative before.
And that God prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. It's right there. Joseph can't make it any plainer. This is in our scriptures. We're saying this is canon, saying this is our belief as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yet, we want to go beyond that.
They're bringing it up in Mormonism Unveiled and the anti-Mormon newspaper articles about Joseph Smith to tear him down because it wasn't acceptable to all Christians.
That's right.
It wasn't something that everybody thought was normal and okay.
Right.
Welcome to Latter-day Saint Ideas. I'm Andrew Knopp, and I'm joined again with David Janeway. We wanted to get together and talk about some of the things we've heard recently about Joseph Smith and the early history of the church in terms of the translation of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's young life. We had a lot of thoughts, and we thought we'd get together and do an unscripted video where we share just what we've been thinking about. So I wanted to start off with this quote. This is Joseph Smith History 1, verse 61. And he says, "The excitement, however, still continued, and rumor with her 1,000 tongues was all the time employed in circulating falsehoods about my father's family and about myself. If I were to relate 1,000th part of them, it would fill up volumes." I think about that and I think our modern historians have decided to go find those rumors, all 1,000 of them, and to fill the volumes and to put them forth and to make them part of our history. And I find that frustrating that what Joseph Smith clearly is establishing as rumor is now become part of our accepted history in many circles. And we reject that, and we support Joseph Smith's idea that there were 1,000 rumors about him, and that's what they were. They were rumors. So you had a couple scriptures you wanted to share, so let's go to those.
The first one I thought of was Jacob chapter 4. So Jacob says this about how the Jews were a stiff-necked people. It said, "And they despised the word of plainness and killed the prophets and sought for things that they could not understand. Wherefore, because of their blindness, which blindness came by looking beyond the mark, they must needs fall." And they stumbled. And I was thinking of that in conjunction with a supposed statement by Joseph Smith. So this is courtesy of the Joseph Smith Foundation. I'm going to read it straight from their site. It says here, this is an exchange that took place between the prophet and his brother Hiram at a conference, and the church held 25th October 1831. On that occasion, Hiram said that he thought best that information of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon be related by Joseph himself to the elders present, that all might know for themselves. In response, Joseph Smith said that it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and also said that it was not expedient for him to relate these things, etc. I believe that many are stumbling because we're looking beyond the mark, because they go, well, Joseph Smith didn't say a lot about the translation, so now I'm forced to go elsewhere to find that information. And the irony of this is, I heard a historian say this recently about, well, let's not put limitations on God. Let's just focus on the content of the Book of Mormon. We don't need to be spending a lot of time on this. Yet they're the ones that are sharing all of this extra stuff, instead of just saying, let's just focus on what Joseph Smith said, which is what the church used to do. I refute and refuse to believe this hiding of these things. It's not credible, so we're not going to bring it up.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about other events where only one person was seeing it, and other people are guessing at what is happening. And that one person says, no, 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 you've misunderstood. I'll tell you what happened. I'm the only one who saw it. The translation of the Book of Mormon only had one witness. That was Joseph
That's
Smith.
right. That's
Everyone
right.
else was a scribe, but not a witness to the translation process.
Right.
And most of these rumors about Joseph Smith translating using something else were circulating during his own lifetime. These newspaper articles were coming out talking about him using a stone and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon. And he came out in his own lifetime and said, I will tell you how I translated the Book of Mormon. I translated it by the power of God using the Urim and Thummim that came with the plates. Not some other stone that I'm calling the Urim and Thummim, which he didn't do.
That's right.
But specifically this instrument prepared for the purpose of translating the book. And those are his words. But modern historians want to look beyond the mark, as you said. They don't want to believe what Joseph Smith repeatedly said. And
right.
It's not just that he said it one time in Joseph Smith history. This is Seerstone versus Urim and Thummim from the Joseph Smith Foundation. They outlined 13 different times where Joseph Smith repeated it the same way. We also have God saying that he gave Joseph Smith power to translate the Book of Mormon by the power of by the Urim and Thummim. Okay? Not by a separate single stone.
That's right.
We have Oliver Cowdery, who was the primary scribe, but also a witness, the second elder of the church, to the plates and the Urim and Thummim through Moroni, showing those to him, saying that they were done by the Urim and Thummim. And yet we don't want to believe it. That can't be that. We have to somehow read all the rumors.
Yeah. We want more information, and we love it, and we have our attention spans are of such that we love to grab new things. Joseph Smith History 1:1, Joseph tells us why he's writing this history. You referenced verse 61 of all the rumors. He says, owing to the many reports which have been put in circulation by evil disposed and designing persons in relation to the rise of the progress of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all of which have been designed by the authors thereof to militate against its character as a church and its progress in the world, I have been induced to write this history to disabuse the public mind and put all inquiries after truth in possession of the facts as they have transpired. So he's doing this in 1838. This is the purpose that he's doing it. And you just referenced, so Joseph Smith tells us this in verse 35. Also, this is what's in the box with the plates, my friends. Also, there were 2 stones in silver bows, and these stones fastened to a breastplate constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim, deposited with the plates, and the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times, and that God prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. It's right there. Joseph can't make it any plainer. It's in his history. And here's, let's not forget, where is this found?
The scriptures.
That's right. This is in our scriptures. We're saying this is canon, saying this is our belief as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yet, we want to go beyond that.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of people don't understand why that is, Dave. And they don't understand what happened because of the Mark Hoffman forgeries. When the Mark Hoffman forgeries came out in the 80s, and they were thought to be authentic, our church historians at BYU and elsewhere rewrote the early narrative of the church to try to match the Mark Hoffman forgeries because they thought they were legit. And now they had to explain, and they had to come up with this whole narrative about how, well, this is normal. Folk magic was normal. They were all involved in folk magic, and it was all okay, even though it wasn't part of the narrative before. But then after the Mark Hoffman forgeries are revealed to be false, instead of us abandoning that rewriting of our early history, it stayed part of the history of the church.
Right.
And those men continued to push it into the saints' books, into the gospel topics essays, and all these other places, instead of rejecting those narratives.
I find it fascinating that they spend 15 plus minutes, in any video that you will see, trying to convince us all that Seerstones were just everywhere in New York, and that it was common, and folk magic was common. And we just, this was normal for Joseph. It was normal for everyone that was around there. And yet I go, okay, well then how come it seems like we're ashamed of this, even as early in the 1830s, because we're not really talking about it and we're refuting it? I find that very contradictory, honestly.
Yes, and also, if it was so common and so accepted by everyone, why are anti-Mormons bringing it up as an attack on Joseph Smith? If they were to bring up, oh, he read the Bible, he's getting all of this stuff from the Bible, other people would hear that and go, well, what's wrong with that? Everybody's reading the Bible. They're bringing it up in Mormonism Unveiled and the anti-Mormon newspaper articles about Joseph Smith to tear him down because it wasn't acceptable to all Christians.
That's right.
It wasn't
That's
something that everybody thought was normal and okay.
Right.
But now
exactly
our own
right.
historians are rewriting the history because they want to make it seem like this was something everyone was okay with. And as Hannah Stoddard has pointed out, we have no references, not a single reference from any of Joseph Smith's family to him being involved in using a single seerstone to find lost objects or to look for treasure. If it was so okay for them, they would have written it down as part of their everyday life and the things they were doing. Instead, Lucy Mack Smith says nothing about it. You don't have a single reference. And these references are coming from anti-Mormons and enemies of Joseph Smith. We have a few references where Josiah Stoll says that Joseph Smith looked into his stone. Okay? Now, that is a very tiny percentage of these sources. And Josiah Stoll's telling that story, and Martin Harris telling the story to Edward Stevenson. Those accounts don't talk about Joseph Smith being involved in animal sacrifices or any of these other cult-like things. And so the temptation that I think some of the historians fall into is this idea that, well, maybe Joseph was dabbling in it, but he was only doing some of it. He was doing sort of an Aaronic priesthood, as Richard Bushman says, a preparatory priesthood, right? So he has a gift from God, but it's in its infant sort of young stages. But the problem with that is you don't have any credible sources that talk about Joseph Smith using faith or talking about how whatever task he's given by God to do in this preparatory phase ends up coming to light. None of the efforts he makes, if these accounts are true, which they're not, but if they were true, to find treasure ever result in treasure. He doesn't find anything. God's really giving him this gift. Does God give someone a gift that doesn't work? Does God say, I'm going to give you the gift to speak in a foreign language? Oh, no, you can't actually speak in a foreign language. What would be the point of God giving Joseph a gift to find things if he can't ever find anything?
That's exactly right. And that's, I mean, you referenced the 1826 trial a couple of times there with William Purple. That the animal sacrifice one is mentioned directly in there. And that's one of the things, that I'm doing now is I'll have someone read it, something about it, or they'll share it with me. And I'm like, I want to read the account myself. I want to read exactly what's in there. I realized that I hadn't read the full account, that I had read excerpts of the account. So I read the full account and reminded myself today, and it's right there. But yet you and I just heard on a previous video, not even a few days ago, of them talking about Joseph going to Sally Chase, looking into her green seerstone so that he can find this other seerstone. And so you go, well, wait a minute. By what power is Sally Chase using this seerstone that he's using? Which, by the way, later on, Lucy Mack Smith says that the Chases ransack his house because Sally looks into the seerstone saying, I know where the gold plates are. That's definitely not from God telling her where the plates are from that stone. So a huge contradiction there.
And this is not like, some people have tried to make this comparison too, where they say, well, maybe Joseph started off with using it for, not good things, and God turned it into something good. Like, I had a shovel and I was using that shovel to dig holes for people to trip into, but now I'm going to take that shovel and I'm going to use it to dig a garden, okay? But that's not how these instruments work. They don't just do what you want them to do, and it's really up to you. They're either being powered by Satan and his forces, or they're being powered by the power of God. I can use a gun to kill someone. I can use a gun to hunt for food. The gun's not bad. And the sort of implication is, well, seerstones aren't bad because the Urim and Thummim are good, and they're seerstones. So what's the difference? You got one here, you got one here. But that is not what Joseph Smith says. And we have a very specific instance with Hiram Page, where Joseph Smith finds out that Hiram Page has been receiving revelations through a seerstone. Oliver Cowdery believes it. David Whitmer believes it. When Joseph Smith finds out about it, he's upset about it. He goes down there. He had this whole conversation with all these men where Joseph has to convince them that it's not of God, and tells them to destroy the stone and destroy the revelations. Now, does that sound like a culture that is just okay with people using seerstones? It doesn't. It sounds like a culture that is rejecting. Joseph Smith didn't come to Hiram Page and go, you know what, Hiram Page, I totally know where you're coming from. In fact, I got a seerstone right here in my pocket right now. And I've been doing the same things you've been doing. Wanted to let you know that, we need to use your seerstone for good. So let's keep that. And let's try to learn how to use it for good, because it's not the stone that's the problem. It's just how you're using it. No, we have none of that. We have that's from the devil, and it needs to be destroyed. Grind it to powder is what he tells them to do.
That's right. Yeah, and that's that whole thing about opposition, that it's either from God or it's not. Moroni 7, you can know it's either going to draw you closer to Christ or draw you away from Christ. We sometimes trying to live in this kind of third category. And I remember having conversations about this with guys philosophizing in college. I don't know if that's the right word, philosophizing, but just I was with a roommate, and we were talking about, that there's just these powers in the universe. Oh, you can be used for good or used for bad. But it's really up to you and how you have, whether you use your faith. And it's interesting because one of the videos that you and I watched, it was really going down that path, because they used the phrase, well, we're using Joseph where he is at. So he's using this stone inappropriately, but the Lord's going to use him where he's at, using this stone inappropriately so that he can, this preparatory, it kind of going up to that preparatory gospel Bushman type of
narrative,
understanding and belief and narrative. Thank you. I have questions because I want to know how you got from A to C, and you go right through B, which I go, that's not an intersection to C. That's way over here. So what are you doing? So please explain me the route that you decided to take. It's like in a cab. Are you trying to charge me more money because you're taking this weird route and coming back? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's another expression is the square peg in the round hole. They're pounding it in there because they want to make it fit, instead of just rejecting it as rumors and falsehoods being told about Joseph Smith. Let me bring up a scripture here that I think is important. This is in Doctrine and Covenants, section 5, which is 1829.
Oh, this is, great. Yeah.
Okay. Joseph Smith is told by the Lord, he says, verse 4, and you have a gift to translate the plates. And this is the first gift that I have bestowed upon you. And I have commanded that you should pretend to no other gift until my purpose is fulfilled in this. For I will grant unto you no other gift until it is finished. If this is Joseph Smith's first gift, to translate the plates, then if we want to go with the position that Joseph Smith had a seerstone that he was using for treasure seeking and all this stuff, then you'd have to say it was not a gift from God, because God says, the first gift I'm giving you is the gift to translate. So if it's not a gift from God, where is it coming from? And that's why it's not true. It's not what Joseph Smith has said. It's not something he talks about using. He makes zero references to it. I want to go back to what we talked about with Josiah Stoll and how we talked about why people don't want to believe Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith says that the story of him being a money digger originated from the Josiah Stoll hiring. I found another account, thanks again, Joseph Smith Foundation, of that same story. Now listen to this, Dave. During this time, as is common to most or all use, I fell into many vices and follies. But as my accusers are and have been forward to accuse me of being guilty of gross and outrageous violations of the peace and good order of the community. So he's talking about what he's being accused of. Okay, in this quote, he says, I take the occasion to remark that though, as I have said above, as is common to most or all youths, I fell into many vices and follies, I have not, neither can it be sustained in truth, been guilty of wronging or injuring any man or society of men, and those imperfections to which I allude, and for which I have often had occasion to lament, were a light and too often vain mind, exhibiting a foolish and trifling conversation. This being all and the worst that my accusers can substantiate against my moral character. He's saying this is the worst thing I did. The worst thing I did was to have a light, vain, foolish, trifling conversation. So here he is clarifying again, because these stories were circulating about him during his lifetime, that he's violating the peace and good order of the community. He said, the only thing I'm guilty of is basically light-mindedness and levity
Right.
and jovial company. So it's
right.
like, do we believe Joseph Smith or not? Or we're going to say, well, when he says that, really, what he really means is treasure digging. What he really means is out doing these things with witchcraft. No, he said it repeatedly. You need to accept what he said and stop looking beyond the mark. Now, I want to address one other thing. There's a quote from Lucy Mack Smith that people quote, even modern historians quote this from her history, where she talks about the Josiah Stowell incident.
Right.
And she says that Josiah Stowell came looking for Joseph because he had means in his possession for seeing things that were unseen. I'm paraphrasing, but the key part is that she says means in his possession. Scholars have assumed that means physical possession of a seerstone. And they try to take that phrase as evidence that Lucy Mack Smith is admitting that Joseph Smith was using a seerstone to find lost objects. And here's the problem I have with that. She doesn't say he has a seerstone. She doesn't say that he'd been using it to find lost objects. Okay? Those are all things that are being filled in the blank on. Okay? Can someone have means in their possession that are not physical means? Can I have spiritual gifts in my possession? Could I have good eyesight? If he's a farmer working on fields looking for rocks when he's plowing, could Joseph have means in his possession to find things that were hard to see? I can interpret that to mean something else, because whether someone's interpreting it to mean he has a seerstone, it is an interpretation. Just like it is my interpretation to say it's not a seerstone, because she doesn't say he has a seerstone. She just says he has means in his possession. That's where we have to say, well, whatever she's referring to, she doesn't want to say it's a seerstone. And if everybody's accepting all of this and everybody's okay with it, why wouldn't she say it? Why wouldn't she say, yep, my son has a seerstone. We all have them. We all use them. It's part of our culture. And he was just doing the thing for Josiah Stowell that he's been doing all along. She doesn't say that. Whatever she's referring to, she's not going to refer to it as a common thing that everybody can have and everybody's okay with.
No, I can get behind that, because it's, again, if it was so common, spending all that time trying to convince us all that that's what it was, I would think there would be more of the members of the church that are faithful members that were talking about it much more openly, at least during the early days of the church. Can we talk about the plates just for a moment? Just switching gears. I've been thinking about, again, I'm going to take a little bit of a page from Rod Meldrum, logically thinking the use of why you need to use the plates, because what do they say is he used
not even using it, not even using the plates,
not even using the plates. And you just need to take a few minutes to just go, wait a minute, if I don't need the plates, why does Moroni give those plates to Joseph Smith to begin with, so that he has to hide and constantly protect and constantly move around? Even before you even get to that point, we have Nephi making 2 sets of plates for a wise purpose. He doesn't know why. You have Mormon who says, I have found these extra plates and I'm going to add them and I don't know why. And then you have him and his son hiding these records somewhere so that people won't find them and destroy them. And you're saying Joseph doesn't need them. I have heard a historian recently. Again, I respect this guy, just don't agree with him on everything. And he says, well, you need to have some kind of physical proof to show that this was real historicity that happened here in the Americas. And I go, hey, that actually is a very valid point. I actually go, that's a very good point, except for this one thing. How did Moroni show the plates to the three witnesses? Did Joseph bring them with him? And then the angel appeared? No.
No.
The angel presents them to them. And so I go, okay, well, Moroni, why did you put my whole family through, I can see Joseph, why did you put myself and my whole family through this when you could have just held on to them the whole time and I could just do it in this different way? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to say you don't need to use the plates for translation. But I've heard some really crazy things. Who was it that said, well, the plates had this power, it was like a battery. And so you got to be close to the physical plates, and then the stone would work because you're physically close to the plates and it powers the Seerstone. I get that you're trying to make things work, but
there's a lot less difficult ways to make this work.
Yeah.
I've seen videos by LDS podcasters saying, well, the plates weren't used because they're just a talisman. They represent a talisman to know that this is a real story and that these people are real, right? Well, you can make talismans that are not made out of gold, that aren't worth a lot of money to all the local robbers. You could have simply given Joseph Smith the Urim and Thummim and not given him the plates at all. And they wouldn't have been trying to harass him to steal those plates for the value of the gold in the plates. We're talking earlier about the idea of walking around with, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000 in cash in your pocket all the time. How many people would want to have to do that every day, be responsible for hiding a big hoard of cash? And people know you have it. Somehow word gets out that you've got this much cash and they know you're hiding it somewhere. And now you've got to spend all this time protecting that cash and moving its locations. It's a ton of work and a bunch of hassle. Doesn't make any sense if this is just a talisman to help him have faith. I just reject that idea. And Joseph Smith himself, his own accounts say he copies characters off the plates. He's practicing the translation. He copies those characters onto paper and gives them to Martin Harris to take to the learned men to prove that these are authentic ancient records.
Oftentimes we talk about the translation taking only about 89, 90 days. And yes, that is true. That was the bulk of the time that he was with Oliver Cowdery. But let's not forget that he had in his possession the plates for almost 2 years. It may have been even a little less than 18 months that he was studying and pondering and working on these things. Lucy Mack Smith mentions multiple times that he wrote down characters, that he studied them. And I believe he was studying it in his mind and in his heart. It's from section 9 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And where's it at, Andrew? What do we call that?
We call that canon. We call that scripture.
That's right. So let's read it. Section 9, verses 7 through 10 to Oliver. This is the voice of the Lord. Behold, you have not understood. Ye have supposed that I would give it unto you when you took no thought, save it was to ask me. But behold, I say unto you that ye must study it out in your mind. Then you must ask me if it be right. And if it is right, I will cause that your bosom shall burn within you. Therefore you shall feel that it is right. But if it be not right, you shall have no such feelings. But you shall have a stupor of thought that shall cause you to forget the thing which is wrong. Therefore you cannot write that which is sacred, save it be given you from me. Now, if you had known this, you could have translated. Nevertheless, it is not expedient that you should translate now. Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by the gift and the power of God, using the plates and the instruments that were put with the plates that were prepared for him to translate.
And by studying it out in his mind, exercising faith, and asking God if what he was doing, the words he had come up with from setting it out in his mind, were right, and getting a confirmation on that. And I think you pointed out what has come to my mind just now, Dave, is Oliver Cowdery thought he could translate without having put in all the time that Joseph Smith had put in studying the characters and learning the language. He thought all he would need to do was ask. And he found out it was a lot more to it than just asking God to tell you.
That's a lot more work. And, when we talk about life lessons, it's the same with life. We have to study things out in our mind and in our heart. Can't take any shortcuts. It's not just for convenience that we may use a different method to try to get things done. We have to do it the way the Lord has prescribed and the way the Lord has prepared.
So the idea that writing wasn't actually needed, it just flies in the face of reason. It's very silly. And it just sounds like looking beyond the mark to try to make these anti-Mormon accounts that Joseph Smith and these late accounts from Emma Smith, who wasn't necessarily anti-Mormon, but her son is telling her what to write because he wants to disprove the Spalding theory. These super late accounts saying that the plates are just left on a table, he's not even using them. All of these things are all post Joseph Smith, and they're all contradicting what he himself and his primary scribe said happened. Why don't we want to believe Joseph Smith? Why don't we take what he wrote and believe what he said? Because he wasn't unclear about what happened. Just because he didn't give us the minutia of how translation worked doesn't mean he didn't tell us how translation worked. What is it when someone's doing something sacred, which is translating an ancient record, using faith, and you're doing something behind a veil, like a veil in the temple, and you're not supposed to be talking about what's happening back there, and only those privileged to go behind the veil are allowed to know what happens there? Why, when people repeatedly ask you to tell them, what's going on behind that veil? And you say, well, I'm not going to tell you what's going on behind that veil. It's sacred.
That's right.
And it's like, I don't accept your answer. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to peek around the corner and I'm going to ask people anyway.
Right. And that's the point. He doesn't even tell his own family the details. It is a sacred responsibility that he took very seriously. I mean, it took him 4 years.
4 years to get qualified.
To qualify, right. Because every time that he went and the family goes, did you get him? Did you get him? He's like, I saw him, but I wasn't able to get him. And then the next year, I didn't get him. Well, we got to do everything we can so you can finally get these plates. I kind of misunderstood because it kind of sounded like it was pre-planned. It's going to be 4 years before you get the plates, Joseph. That's not the case. What Joseph gave in Joseph Smith history was very truncated and very specific for a specific audience. And I guess that might be one of the reasons why others say, well, now I can go beyond that. But when it comes to the translation, as you pointed out, all the times that Joseph talks about it, he's very consistent. He always mentions the plates. He always mentions the interpreters. He always uses interpreters as plural. He doesn't say interpreter. He always says Urim and Thummim or interpreters.
Or spectacles.
Spectacles, exactly. It's always plural, which it's more than one. And I think that's very important to point out. But
and he also always mentions how he was trying to obtain the plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim. The time came for obtaining the plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim. I was qualified to get the plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim. They were a package deal. And there was no point in making that a package deal if you're going to say, well, that Urim and Thummim and that breastplate, you actually don't need those. You're just going to use this stone over here. Which is, again, one of the anti-Mormon accounts that's quoted by these historians really recently. Supposedly, William Purple's like, oh, yes, and when he finds this stone, he says, all time and space was removed from my eye, removed before me, and I had an all-seeing eye. I had the properties of God. That is very similar to what Lucy Mack Smith says about the Urim and Thummim. She says that when Joseph gets the Urim and Thummim, he says to her, they're marvelous, mother. I can see anything. So why would he need instruments that could do that if he already had a single seerstone that gave him an all-seeing eye that removed all space and time that allowed him to see anything? Yeah. Okay, this is not consistent. God wouldn't need to give him or prepare an instrument that would do that if Joseph already had one. And that whole story is made up by someone who never knew Joseph Smith personally. And we can't even prove that he was at that court trial he says he's taking these verbal notes from, these mental notes, because we don't have any of his physical notes, William Purple. And yet we're going to just take his word for this, even though what he's saying Joseph Smith is doing, going to Sally Chase, using her Seerstone to find another Seerstone, traveling all this way to go dig it up, all this stuff in that account is inconsistent with Joseph Smith's own accounts, specifically talking about the poverty of his family and how they had to work every day they could find work, daily labor, hiring themselves out to earn money just to have their daily maintenance. Right. Why would you do that if you could just use your Seerstone to find treasure? Go find some gold, Joseph. You don't need to hire yourself out. You don't need to work for Martin Harris. You don't need to dig wells. Let's use this marvelous gift of yours to go find some treasure. Well, the truth is it wasn't happening. He wasn't doing that. These are anti-Mormon stories. Rumor with her 1,000 tongues, making up the stories that he's doing all these things. We hope that this has been beneficial to you. And if you have questions or thoughts, please leave them in the comments for us. We know that Joseph Smith spoke the truth when he described this process. And we don't have to worry about trying to take this square peg and pound it into the round Seerstone hole.